Free and clear of the chatter from Wall Street, you're listening to Talking Stocks Over Beer, hosted by hedge fund veteran and newsletter writer Mike Alkin, who helps ordinary investors level the playing field against the pros by bringing you market insights and interviews with corporate executives and institutional investors. Mike sifts through all the noise of mainstream financial media and Wall Street to help you focus on what really matters in the markets. And now, here is your host, Mike Alkin.
Welcome to the podcast. It's Monday, November 19th, 2018. Hope you had a good weekend. Got good news for you. I'm going to spare you a long introduction. For those who do listen, you'll know that I am somewhat technologically not proficient. And I have a sound engineer that calls me every week to do the podcast from Baltimore, Garrett, who's listening in here. And for whatever reason, the Skype and the microphone, the headset, nothing was working today. So it took me way longer to figure it out. And which means that we had to go right to my guest, and I don't have a lot of time because Garrett's on a tight schedule. So for those of you who skip forward through my rambling introductions all the time about sports or whatever's going on, I will spare you from having to hear the things that happened this weekend in my world. I'm not going to complain about the grocery shopping that I do and the traffic jams in the aisles and the people don't get out of the way when they're looking at the bonzo beans and they don't see you standing there for 3 minutes waiting after you've said excuse me 3 times. I will not go there. So I will spare you. But this is this podcast about nuclear power. I have on as my guest Andrea Jennetta, who is the founder and publisher of Fuel Cycle Week, which has been around almost 18 or 20 years, I think. And Andrea is well known to utilities and miners for her publication that covers all the goings on in the world of nuclear power. And she and I got off to a rocky start 7, 8, 9 months ago on Twitter. We were going at each other, but we didn't know each other. And but we've gotten to know each other. We knew who each other was, but we never interacted. And we did. And she and I had met at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and we spent hours talking. And we had a great conversation. And we really hit it off. And she got to see my world and learn about how I view the world. And I shared with her my model and how I think of the world to say, listen, you know, when I'm talking nuclear power or uranium, this is not just off the cuff. This is well thought out with a lot of numbers behind it. And I said, here we go. I opened up my laptop and said, let's spend time going through it. And she talked to me about her world and how she thinks about it. And we don't see eye to eye on everything, but we agree on a couple of things to disagree. So anyway, it is really, really fascinating. I was glad that she agreed to come on, and we spend the rest of the time just talking about all things nuclear, not all things, but many things nuclear power. We touch on some uranium miners. So we're just going to cut right to it because I don't have that much time to get into all the nonsense I normally talk about in the intros that you guys skip through. But it's cathartic for me because I get to talk about my stuff. Anyway, here's Andrea Ginetta. Andrea Jennetta, welcome to the podcast.
Mike Alkin, thank you for having me.
So we last saw each other a couple of weeks ago in the great city of Boston at the Nuclear.
We did.
Right? At the Nuclear Energy Institute Fuel Cycle Seminar.
Yeah.
And, you know, these things are great because you get to see people from all over the world, all over different parts of the nuclear fuel chain, the fuel supply chain. And, you know, you get to talk with people and hear different perspectives and love going to these things. And I see you at them and all the time. And, I mean, you've been doing this a long time now, right?
I have been doing this a long time. I've been in nuclear my whole career, 30 years. I am not a technical person, so your podcast audience should know that.
Neither am I.
Yeah, and you don't necessarily need to be in order to understand, although it can be extremely challenging. But you ask a lot of questions. You get the engineers and miners and scientists to explain things to you.
Yeah.
And you explain them back, actually, so you can reach a common language and understanding. And, here I am, 30 years later. I've been publishing Fuel Cycle Week. It is mine. My company publishes it since 2002. I cannot believe it. 16 years.
So take us back through. So, because you're thought of as the Bible for the nuclear industry, right? I mean, everyone I know on both the mining side and the nuclear power generation side, everyone knows you. Everyone subscribes. And it's something that they have to subscribe because it's. You keep everyone updated on the comings and goings of the industry, and you also add some really interesting commentary to it. That is not just it's not dry. It's not you're not reading about atoms, right? And so
no, not at all.
So walk us through the evolution. What brought you into the industry, and then how did you start publishing your own newsletter?
My goodness, I started in the industry working on the Yucca Mountain project, which is doomed.
Yeah.
It is the national U.S. Program for a permanent spent fuel disposal facility. Mm-hmm. And right now, since it's been defunded for several years, so it's on hold. The whole program is on hold. But that's where I started. So I started my career in the back end as a.
Now, were you a muckraking journalist back then, or what?
No, I was not a muckraking journalist at the time. I was. They didn't know what to do with me, Mike. I was a girl with a non-technical degree working for Westinghouse. Westinghouse was a subcontractor out there at the time.
Yeah.
So, but I lucked out because I got hired into the regulatory management division. And that division was responsible for organizing and holding these insanely technical, regulatory-driven meetings with a variety of, with the NRC, with another oversight body called the Nuclear Waste Technical Review Board, with utilities. So I learned I learned everything. And I started to understand how it all worked together. I could write, I could think, I'm articulate. Yeah. One thing led to another. I ended up I moved to D.C. I got a great job. I moved here. I did more of the same, more government contracting. I hooked up with some women who were pioneering a consulting practice, really focused on Japanese nuclear utilities and other overseas nuclear utilities who have offices in D.C. and they, it matters what the U.S. is doing. It matters what the U.S. is thinking, particularly around nuclear and uranium. Did that for a while. Then, finally, I went to work for a company that published some newsletters. That company is gone, and those newsletters are gone. Mm-hmm. But when I left that company, I founded International Nuclear Associates. I founded Fuel Cycle Week. Fuel Cycle Week didn't really hit its stride until I would say maybe 10 years ago when I started doing my Buzz column. And that's the claim to fame, I would say, if there is one.
Explain
the Buzz.
What the Buzz is.
Well, the Buzz is, it's whatever I want it to be or what I feel it needs to be. But up until, I would say, maybe 5 minutes ago, the nuclear industry had a very hard time communicating, criticizing itself, having any kind of humor, having any kind of fun. And I just felt there was a need for it. There was this gaping hole of fun and entertainment and analysis and criticism, and maybe a marketplace for ideas, a place for people to really talk about things, not with platitudes and, using, bullshit words, but to really talk about things. And that's where Fuel Cycle Week came in. And, it's a niche. It's a niche within a niche within a niche. And I've been doing it for 18 years. It's a blast. It's fun. And as you said, a lot of people, particularly in the United States, are subscribers to it. And the feedback I get is, while, I certainly make some people angry, that's a good thing, actually. I try to keep the industry honest. I think I say things that everybody is thinking, but no one will actually say. And it's been successful. It's a successful model.
Well,
and I also write it. I have to tell you, I'm a busy executive.
Yeah.
So many publications are just boring. I mean, they are boring. Like, this doesn't help me at all. So I also write as a busy executive. I want to read things that are entertaining and that tell me what I need to know. I don't need to know everything. I don't need to know every single detail. Yeah. Tell me what I need to know. Bottom line it for me. And that's been our winning formula.
That's great. And so when you started, did you start out, was it the miners who wanted to subscribe or the nuclear power companies? How did that
really, I had an amazing, I would say, coalition of both utilities and suppliers. We weren't initially we didn't have as many of the producers as we do now. We also didn't have as many of the utilities. I mean, we had a core, I would say.
Right.
And I think that most of them, I mean, I'm going to guess as high as like 75% of them are still subscribers, which is amazing considering now the amount of competition.
Yeah.
For publication dollars. There's a lot of competition now.
Well, it's interesting because you and I met, so we formally had a talk a couple of weeks ago. But I am obviously, I run a uranium fund, and I've been pro uranium mining for the last year, publicly for about a year and change, since maybe April, I think, of last year is when. And you don't know this, but I never spoke publicly anywhere. I hate it. I dread speaking publicly, even on this. I'm an introvert, so even doing this podcast.
I would not. Now, see, you can't tell that.
I know.
That does not come across.
If I'm sitting in a room for 10 hours just reading and doing research, that's where I'm at my happiest. So for me to go out and publicly speak was not easy. And actually, the first one I did on a website called Real Vision TV, and really it has I'm guessing 50,000 people around the world who subscribe because they want to get investment ideas, and they asked me to appear to do a presentation on nuclear power. They had seen something that a friend of mine had sent them, and so they came and did it, and we did it in my home, and in my basement I have a big screen TV, and I projected on the presentation. So I figured the camera would be in front of me, and I would be looking at the presentation, and I would just start talking. Well, when the guy got here, it turned out that something didn't work, and so I had to do it from memory. Now, you know how number intensive some of this stuff is.
Yes.
Thank God. So here I am. I've never spoken publicly before, let alone stared into a camera, and with the lights beaming on me. What should have been a 20-minute presentation took about 4 hours with all the takes that I had to do. So that was my entree into it. But so I had never really spoken publicly, and then I went to a few conferences and did it, and it's just not my thing, but I do it. But so I see it as an investment opportunity. So, but you and I had probably first encountered each other, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 months ago on Twitter, and
yes,
right, and we had a little
yes. And ladies and gentlemen, this is not there's an art and a science to Twitter, and I think that Mike and I probably flew like violated every rule of, the proper, it was not,
and
it was not pretty.
And what I love about it, though, is, and I tell this, right, is I tell my kids all the time, too, just the thing that drives me nuts about the electronic communication is you don't know, tone and tenor, everything gets lost.
That's right.
Right? And you don't know people, and you assume things, and again, the assumption is the mother of all, right? So it was great. So well, telling the audience here, this. So last week or 2 weeks ago, I spoke at this conference, and I stand up there, and I said, now there were 150 or so fuel buyers in the audience, and I said, I started out by saying, to the fuel buyers, you guys have done an unbelievable job during the downturn since Fukushima, and it's really hard, and I know it's difficult, and it's brutal, and in a tough environment, and you haven't been buying uranium, and kudos to you, and the uranium miners should be ashamed of themselves because they increased production. Now, I
want your audience to know, I want your audience to know that was so buzz-esque. That was beyond buzz. That was meta buzz. Because it's true, and you have so much credibility though, because you come right from the financial side. So there was nothing that any of the producers could say to you. What are they going to say?
Exactly, right?
They couldn't. They couldn't.
And so the funny thing was afterwards, you and I, and again, we still hadn't formally met. And
we really hadn't.
We hadn't, no. And we just in the hallway started talking, and we were both I knew you, and so you'll know it's very funny, guys. So listeners, in Andrea's thing, sometimes, and she's been right. Andrea has been dead on, balls accurate, because she talks in there, and she'll say in her buzz sometimes, because somebody will call me up and tell me about it, and they'll say, Andrea is saying the stupid money's in the room, the investors, and Andrea has seen for so many times the analysts stand up there and say this is the bottom, and it's been so wrong for so long, and so Andrea and a lot of it has been, and Andrea, we'll get into what intrigued me about the whole industry, but so Andrea and I started talking, and there's definitely tension at first.
Initially,
and she said, "What are you doing here? Like, why are you talking to these guys?" Because my presentation was on the cost of new mines and to bring online and stuff. And I said, "Well, do you have a few minutes?" And she said, "Yes." And we sat down for probably an hour and a half.
Oh God, I think it was longer.
It could have been longer.
It was.
Right, and
it was awesome. It was really great.
And Andrea's first thing that she said to me was, "Well, I think you're like a mouthpiece for the miners." And I said, and that's when it hit me. I said, wow, we're like two ships sailing past each other in the night. And that's when I said to Andrea, I said, I allocate capital to miners. That I'm not a mouthpiece. All I am is holding these guys accountable. And you should be on the phone when I talk to these management teams, because
oh God, I wish,
because I'm not their friend. It's like a police interrogation. When I first meet them, because I want to understand what's your logic been for dilution, why have you been doing this, and whomever it is, and I walk them through it, and then I decide whether or not I'm going to allocate capital to them. But so, and I don't care if they like me or not; they could hate me as long as they do what's right for shareholders. So that was our first thing, and then. You and I said,
and actually, we're the same. We're actually the same in that, because and you have the numbers to back you up. I just have anyone with a brain looking at their bottom line, their spreadsheets, their balance sheets, and knowing what utilities are doing and the disconnect. And as your average retail investor, who would you believe? And if you believe in the supply side people, well, they're like telling you maybe 5% of what's going on. And it just, it's the principle of the thing. It's dishonest. And I cannot, I hate dishonesty. Like, just be honest, be truthful. And they haven't been in a very long time.
And I think you were surprised during the presentation when I said, let me tell you a couple of things. Number one is the costs that they're telling you about are higher than they say they are.
Well, I'm just glad somebody said it.
Yeah, and they put them in different buckets, but in those glossy presentations, when they're looking to raise capital, they'll tell you one cost, and they could be in another bucket. It still ultimately is GAAP compliant. It shows up, but at the end of the day, what you think it costs to pull out of the ground, and then secondly, the cost that it's going to cost to build these new things. You got all this mining inflation and stuff like that. So when you and I sat down, I said, okay, do you have time? And I opened up my model, and I said, here it is. And because I said it's important for you to see where I come from, that everything is, I'm thinking like it's analyzed, whether it's supply, demand, secondary supply. And it's interesting. And then I understand where you come from, right? Because you've watched for 7 years of people out there saying it's turning tomorrow, while they're increasing production. And for me, 3 plus years now, when I really started digging my teeth into the world of uranium and nuclear power, one of the things I did, and you and I were talking offline how I'm not a technology guy, but I know how to use YouTube. And I would go on YouTube, and as I was peeling the onion back, and I would watch all of these bull cases for nuclear power, for uranium. And as I got to do my research, I started to say, wait a second, how come they're not talking about underfeeding? Wait a second, how come they're not talking about the DOE selling uranium? Why aren't they talking about Kazatomprom devaluing the tenge, Kazakhstan devaluing the tenge, and transfer law pricing? And you realize that a lot of stuff gets glossed over. And so it's as you start to peel the onion back, and we sat down and I said, for me, from my perspective, in the world of cyclical investing, deep cyclicals, when things get so bad and so ugly, that's when I get interested, because right, if they don't make a change, right, they're going to get run over. They're going to fade into oblivion. And so, part of my job and others who are investing in the space now at this point, because they've diluted these retail shareholders till kingdom come, is to make them accountable and say, listen, you want capital? Well, you better start doing the right things. And so anyway, and it was great to talk with you, to hear your perspective about it, and how, it's interesting to see the mood in the room, right? Because now I will say, from a macro perspective, from the side that I sit on, where a couple of years ago, I remember being at the WNA in Toronto, and it was just doom and gloom. Everything was done, sure, right? Yeah, and I was there. You were there, and I agreed with that. I absolutely agreed with that sentiment. And you fast forward now, where you're like, okay, and from the miner's perspective, it's like, okay, supply is coming in, and underfeeding seems to be reducing, and there's supply crunches, supply is coming down, and so it's there's, from a supply perspective, it's starting to heal a little bit, or I think a lot. But I agree with you. Right, it's doing. Yeah. They have finally. But these guys, and I stood up there and said at that conference, for year after year, they were increasing production. What were they thinking about? Right. Right. It was crazy. Yeah. So but one of the things we learned about each other was, and I think because you thought I was just another ugly face with a finance thing, was I actually do care about nuclear power. And that I truly believe the purpose of it. I believe in the reasons why it should exist. I believe it's the safest form of electricity generation. It is, by a country mile. I believe that it's necessary, especially in parts of the world where they're trying to urbanize, and the carbon-free nature of it. So that, I think there was a common ground there when we met, and I realized that you really are. Not only are you a publisher of the Bible, but you also are a real nuclear power advocate. So talk to me about that, where the genesis of that, and how you think about it. And for me, one of the things that when I first started 3 years ago, saying, okay, let me see the case for uranium miners, was is my first thought was, are wind and solar just going to dominate this, and is nuclear power fading into oblivion? It's not. They're complementary. But talk to me about how you became such a proponent of it.
Well, when you work on something as controversial, unpopular, and political as Yucca Mountain, and you learn very quickly how hard it is to talk to the average member of the public and explain this extremely technical technology, explain that radiation doesn't follow you around and haunt you and infect you and kill you, how hard it is to explain the way engineers think about things and the tolerances and 10 to the minus 25 in terms of probability. It's crazy. It's insane. It's frustrating. What is almost more frustrating, and I say that, and I'm saying this directly to your listeners who are considering becoming pro-nuclear advocates, is the industry itself has done a crap job, not only of advocating, of educating, but in finding tools and ways to support individuals who want to advocate for it. I mean, it has been brutal. It has been frustrating. It has been thankless. And at the end of the day, what people need to understand are two things. One, facts actually don't matter. And two, it's political. Everything about nuclear energy, particularly about the back end, spent fuel storage, it is political. What do I mean by political? I mean that people's worldviews and what they want for the world are manifested in broad positions in the two parties in the United States of why nuclear sucks or why it doesn't suck. Now, as it turns out, and I'm a Democrat, and I always have been, okay? And I was a Democrat, back in the day when all Democrats were anti-nuclear. Well, that has shifted enormously. And in Boston, we had the honor and privilege of hearing from Mike Schellenberger, who is the president and founder of Environmental Progress. He was one of the staunchest, most extreme anti-nuclear people you would ever meet on the face of the planet. And yet he has learned slowly over the years that it is not what they have been telling you. And so these days, I'm actually more optimistic than I have been in a long time because of efforts like Michael's. Now, Michael is in a unique position. Since he helped to write the anti-nuclear activist playbook, now he can use it against the anti-nuclear advocates.
He knows it well, right?
He really does, because he wrote it. And I think the biggest difference is in climate change and concern about climate change. Now I'm going to give you a tangent. I'm going to stop right there. I'll
you
give you,
just go.
Here's a tangent. Okay, and I can do this. All right, I can talk for hours about this stuff.
Feel free.
One of the biggest problems that the nuclear industry has had, and we have many problems, but the biggest is that by and large, it is populated and peopled by what I will call, who are, let's just say, right of center, conservative people. Mm-hmm. And politically, over the past 10 to 15 years, generally speaking, people on the right have been climate change skeptics. Mm-hmm. So can you imagine, here's the climate change issue, a gift from the nuclear gods, the number one issue with which to get people who had no idea about nuclear, skeptical about nuclear, maybe anti-nuclear, but concerned, to get them over the finish line to being, yep, nuclear is the solution. Nuclear is absolutely the solution to climate change, and it's what we should do. So here you have this industry, predominantly conservative, being so resistant to running with climate change due to the skepticism and almost denial. Can you imagine this? I mean, this is like, here you have like, and I'm saying this to your audience, which I'm guessing, I'm assuming, yes, could possibly make an ass out of myself. You know, maybe a little more over to the right, maybe more conservative, and going climate change. I don't. That's bullshit. I don't believe any of this. I reject the science. Well, my friends, if you're going to be pro-nuclear, you're going to have to find a way, you know, in your heart to square it. And one way you can do this, and you can do your advocacy, is this, to tell yourself this and to tell your friends and colleagues this: no one's against clean air and water, and nuclear is a fantastic way to make sure we have clean air and clean water. So that's, yeah. Now, another problem that the nuclear industry has had, particularly in this country, is utilities having 10,000 conflicts of interest. Yep. I mean, it's a big problem. Utilities own solar, they own wind, they own oil, natural gas is cheap and easier to build, and then they have nuclear for a lot of different reasons, many of which are driven by nuclear's inability to, you know, seem warm, seem friendly, know how to advocate for itself.
Yeah.
You know, the utility industry has either shot itself in the foot or been perfectly willing to throw nuclear under the bus. It's pretty interesting. Exelon changes all of that.
Yep.
You know, they have so much market power. They own more reactors than anybody. And the fact that they have come out, you know, they have come out swinging. They've changed enormously even their approach. They recently co-signed a letter with the Sierra Club and the Natural Resources Defense Council, who are you know, nuclear haters, to try to preserve nuclear and renewables.
Look at what last week the Union of Concerned Scientists.
Right, because of climate change. That's
These guys for decades have been anti-nuclear, and they came out.
They really have been, yeah.
Right?
So
and
things are changing on both the left and the right. Things are changing, people, and it's because of climate change. So climate change is a gift. It is absolutely
well, and they came out and said, look, we to keep these financially struggling nuclear power plants alive, to get to where we need to be climate-wise, we need nuclear power. And as much as it probably pained them to say that, right? Yes. But they wrote a lengthy paper saying, you know, folks.
They did.
Yeah.
And Michael Schellenberger in his talk brought that up. He essentially said any anti-nuclear, let me back up. Any organization that is concerned about climate change, that is, you know, advocating to change electricity industries and the technologies that are used because of climate change, any of those who are anti-nuclear, we wipe the floor. We have absolutely discredited them. They cannot be credible if they're anti-nuclear. And that's just brilliant. I mean, so things have changed. Now, with respect to the industry in the U.S., as you said, deregulated reactors are struggling.
Yep.
Deregulated reactors have done everything they can to get their costs down, and still they don't clear the auctions, forward electricity auctions. It's insane. It's crazy. So they face enormous challenges, financial challenges for their survival. And when you and I were talking in Boston, I am a defender of nuclear utilities. Not perfect, ladies and gentlemen. The nuclear utility industry, I will also be the first one to criticize them. They've done so many stupid things. But at the same time, nuclear utilities, fuel buyers in deregulated markets have to be helped. They are not the enemy. We cannot demonize them. And so I always defend them as well. I mean, one, they're, what are they supposed to do? They can't single-handedly fix the supply-demand problem. Well, number two, they're the ultimate customer. I mean, so if you're not going to change your, business model and your thought process in terms of production or your marketing and sales strategy to make your customers happy, then why are you even in business?
Yeah.
And I think that was a great place where you and I also had a meeting of the minds, like, what are they doing? What are these producers doing?
Exactly. And,
yeah.
It's fascinating because you think about, so in the folks, to listeners, in the unregulated markets, meaning it's competitive versus a regulated market where the nuclear power plant goes to the Public Utility Commission and says, costs gone up, and they say, okay, and they pass it on to ratepayers. They have fuel riders.
Correct.
And they have other riders. They have all different riders. And
they do.
But in unregulated, it's a competitive marketplace, and natural gas prices being where they are, especially, and we're really talking in the U.S. right now. And the U.S. is about a third of nuclear power around the world, roughly. And all the growth, folks who are listening, the growth is all coming from the emerging markets in Asia. But when you're competing with natural gas that has imploded because of the U.S. shale plays, it makes it more competitive. Now, interestingly, Andrea, natural gas has gone from $2.50 to over $4.50 per MCF here.
Right, because of the winter, because we had that storm last week that nobody was expecting.
Yeah. So you could see these things could spike. But so what Andrea's saying is the competitive nature in those markets. But what you're seeing is, I think you're seeing some support now from my perspective. And having spoken to people who've been around for many, many administrations, a couple of realities is, one, this administration is pro-nuclear power, but even at the state level, if these where they're uncompetitive, they need alternatives and
they do.
To replace those, and it's not always there. So you're seeing New York and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, where they're stepping up and trying to help these plants that are not competitive, and they're getting support.
Yes.
Right.
And it is at the state level. That's where this, and, not a fan of the current administration. I will say that as I have lived in D.C. for almost 30 years, I have watched administrations come and go, Democrat, Republican. Honestly, if you look at the record, nuclear has done better, has been served better under Democratic administrations, and that's because at least Republicans like oil and natural gas better. There's always lip service to nuclear, but they never really, they never move the ball. They're never getting closer to the end line.
Well,
having said that, I'll say that electricity industry prices and markets and practices really happen at the state level. And so you will see that the Democratic, New York state legislature, or the Democratic Illinois state legislature, or the New Jersey Democratic state legislature, they're all the ones that have passed zero emissions credit regulations. It's harder in other states, which may be more red-leaning, because they got a lot of oil and natural gas.
Yep.
So
I actually said earlier, Pennsylvania has that issue. I didn't mean Pennsylvania.
It totally has that issue.
Because they have a huge shale place.
They do. They absolutely do. So what are they going to do? Say, well, that's too bad. And it's very hard to balance these competing interests. And they're all, it's all important. I mean, I'm not going to say that there isn't a role for natural gas. Look, coal is evil. Coal kills people. The environmental and social and let's face it, economic toll, because we haven't even begun to start cleaning up coal ash, which is everywhere in this country. Coal is just evil. So you're never going to hear me advocate for coal. Coal needs to go away. Natural gas is, in fact, less dirty, but it is dirty. But it still has a role to play, at least for now. So I'm not.
Well, you just said
not
something interesting.
I'm
sorry to interrupt, but
yes.
it's less dirty. But if you
less
think about the commercials, right? Clean natural gas. Right? It's the lobbies are big. I mean, the oil and gas lobbies are huge, and so to the average Joe or Jane sitting at home, they're thinking, "Oh, natural gas is perfectly clean."
Right, it's natural, and there's greenwashing. I mean, I think renewables. If that's not a case study at Wharton Business School of how you go out and a campaign and like brainwash people.
Yeah.
It's been brilliant. The nuclear industry will tell you, well, we don't have the money, they have more money. And that's true, but creative people can do a lot with not a lot of money. Hello?
It's Schellenberger pointed out in his presentation, Mike pointed out that you need, and now again, folks, the listeners, this is coming from a guy who wrote the Bible on anti-nuclear activism, who switched, and he stood up there and he put up a slide that says, you need 450 times more land for solar than you do for nuclear.
You do.
Right? And he shared
yes.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrea. I'm sorry.
Well, and it's that, and you're not going to, and you cannot generate as much, from a big solar farm that takes up, godly amounts of land, not to mention the transmission lines that you have to build, which are always controversial. Versus here you have the footprint of a nuclear reactor, which is so much smaller. I mean, everything about nuclear is, it has an elegance. It's just we've done a really bad job of selling it. And I mean, we're the worst. My God.
It's terrible. He showed a picture, 45 years of Swiss nuclear waste in a room the size of a classroom, right? I mean,
that's right.
It looked like the size of a basement or something in little containers. And he pointed out how solar panels produce 300 times there
are no policies for disposal of those things. So let's not, folks. I had thought a few years ago, I proposed when I was doing more consulting work, advocacy work. Hey, let's go after this. Let's go after the fact that there is no disposal path for solar panels. They're toxic. We could really, if this isn't an issue that we could really get a beachhead on, there isn't one. But at the time, perhaps it was a little too, a bridge too far. Now, I'm not so sure that kind of suggestion would be dismissed outright. Because it's money, it's politics, it's ugly, it's dirty. It's like if the nuclear industry isn't, going to get its hands dirty, then these things aren't going to happen. But it's also understandable. Utilities have a lot of conflicts of interest. So thank God for Exelon because it doesn't have any.
It's so interesting, too, when you brought politics into it. The more left-leaning are your anti-nukes typically, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Right? Yet the more left-leaning will believe in climate change. And
that is correct.
Right?
That's right. And that's why Mike Schellenberger has been able to, capitalize on that. Like, you can't have it both ways. And by the way, radiation isn't pollution. It's just radiation, and it's normal. It's natural. We have 100 years of experience with radiation exposure in human beings. We do know what happens. We do know how to treat cancer. When that happens, does it happen from radiation exposure? No, actually it doesn't, because we're all getting inundated right now.
When you fly at 35,000 feet, six hours cross country, you're getting plenty of radiation.
Boy, you get a big old dose right there. Yeah. It's hard work though. Schellenberger also did a great job with showing how nuclear energy and the Cold War nuclear weapons testing and radiation all got mixed up, to into a narrative that really did not make nuclear energy look very good. It got associated with the mushroom cloud.
Yep.
And that's a very powerful image to try to knock down. Because who's pro nuclear holocaust? Well, no one is. But can you be pro-nuclear and be anti-global holocaust with nuclear weapons? Of course you can. But it's been very hard. That's another thing that we've had a hard time overcoming.
For sure.
Yeah.
And you've had movies made against nuclear power, right? I mean, it's Hollywood.
China syndrome.
Right. It's the China syndrome. Yeah. And
there's always some dirty bomb that's going to be exploded in New York City.
Yeah.
Oh my God. There's rogue uranium. And there isn't actually. There's no rogue uranium out there. We know where all the uranium is. There aren't that many companies that are willing to transport it. So it's not running amok out there in the world.
Let's shift gears for a second. One of the things as you look forward to anything with any industry, you look for technology that can either hurt it and marginalize it, or that can bring it to the next level. And one of the problems with nuclear power is these things are so big, and every reactor is specific to that needs. And in some places, folks, you might have 3 reactors or 2 reactors on that one utility might own on one site, and each reactor could be different than the next. And they're massive when they're transporting. So because they're so big, the forging requirements for the steel are mammoth, and there's really no forging in the U.S. So
there isn't.
Right, and then and because you have to build everything custom, build it on site, transport it. Sometimes you've got to reinforce bridges that carry these things across them. That the costs get out of control. They're building them in wind and rain and snow, and that's why 8 billion turns to 12 billion, and 6 years turns to 10 or 12.
Yeah.
So you don't have the ability to really generate economies of scale. Now, as you think about what's down the road and coming, small modular reactors have a potential where you can build them in a factory that's clean and sterile, and then transport them. How do you think about when you think about technological change in nuclear power? How do you think about SMRs?
Well, pro SMRs. No one who is pro nuclear, I think, can be anti SMR.
Right. Yeah.
I have thought a lot about what the hell is the nuclear industry's problem when it comes to building reactors. I don't believe it's this hard. Evidently, it is this hard.
In the West, right?
Well, yeah. I would also say this. We don't really know how much it costs to build things in China.
Yeah.
But we're not China, and I'm not, yay China's nuclear program, hooray. But in a way, I don't care because I don't live there. I live here. Now, France had a very successful nuclear power construction program in the 70s. It was driven by the oil crisis. It was driven by France doesn't have any of its own oil resources. They just don't.
Right.
And so the government was willing to and committed to, hundreds of gajillions of dollars to get this program set up, to have a great French nuclear infrastructure. And they built, and by they, it's EDF, Électricité de France, built, 50-something reactors? I think that's how many they have. And they're all the same. They're of, one design, and there may have been, some changes, they've been tweaked, but that's it. And they built them, and it works. Here in the United States, we did not do that, and there's a very good reason for it. It's called capitalism, and hey, yay, whereby different designs and different approaches and different tweaks, and why don't we do this, and and so whichever one would work, or that would be the winner. Well, it of course didn't work out that way. And the U.S. does not have nuclear industry infrastructure at all.
Yep.
So yes, that's
Pretty amazing when you think about it. The biggest
it is,
nuclear consumer.
considering it's the biggest market. It's the biggest market. It's amazing. Two things on that. One is, had it not been for overseas suppliers, the nuclear industry in the United States would not have survived. So you'll never hear me being, anti lots of suppliers. I don't care where they're from. And again, this is because nuclear utilities have to survive. If they don't, we don't have an industry. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, when Westinghouse set about designing, licensing, and then building at the AP1000 reactor and modular approach, and this was going to revolutionize everything, boy, they really screwed up. I don't know why that is. I don't know whether the challenges of first of a kind were so overwhelming that they simply collapsed. I don't know whether it's Toshiba's fault that there wasn't more oversight and accountability. I don't know whether it was the utilities, SCANA and Southern, not, being more aggressive in their inspections and check. And I don't have an answer for that, Mike. And I do worry. Hi there, financial community, talking directly to you now. I worry that at a certain point, the financial community is going to say, you know what? Yay, nuclear, but this freaking costs too much. And you cannot keep expecting us to somehow figure out a miraculous way to get you this capital, at interest rate X, when you're going to keep screwing it up. Yeah. And, oh, by the way, we're still not going to get we're not going to get a return until, this thing has been operating for 20 years. So I don't know what the answer there is. I am open to creativity. I will say this. I think it was really, really intriguing when it's Brookfield. And if I've got the name wrong, forgive me.
Yep.
But when Brookfield bought Westinghouse, now what in the hell is a private equity, well, they're not private, but what the hell is this kind of, hedge fundy type publicly traded company based in Canada, a fairly conservative financial country? What the hell are they doing buying Westinghouse? Well, at least the fuel part of it, the fuel side of the business, fantastic, does make money, is profitable. I really wonder what they're going to do with the reactor side. Are they going to try to figure it out? So maybe it doesn't.
Try and
I don't know
on the global stage, right?
I don't know. I don't even know if it's. And I would say this, particularly to your audience, by compete, at least to me, that means break even, don't lose money. You don't make money on reactors. You look at Russia, you look at Rosatom, and their reactors, when they sell reactors, they're really selling lifetime fuel supply. Well, they're selling all these other things. I don't think they lose money on those reactors, but you don't make money constructing reactors.
Well,
it's almost
absolutely.
I know, and you love the Russians.
Well,
talk about the
Russians and the Chinese. If you think of what so intrigues me about them is, they don't want to go toe to toe with us militarily, but so the way they go about things is geopolitically. And you think about Rosatom, or you think about the Chinese nuclear program. What these countries have done is they say, okay, in the emerging world, you've got this massive move for urbanization. You've got filthy air. Well, so let's vertically integrate the entire nuclear fuel cycle. We will buy uranium mines. We will buy conversion and enrichment, and we will build a reactor for you, country. We'll finance it for you. We'll provide you with all the supplies necessary. We'll even operate it for you for a while. It's a no-brainer. And now you've got these countries hooked on dependency on you. in the part of the world that's rapid and growing. And you're right, like you said, we don't really know their costs, but it doesn't matter because
it doesn't.
Right?
I agree with that. It doesn't matter.
The Husab mine in Namibia that was going to produce 15 million pounds, that's all they've been talking about. And last year it produced 2, maybe this year it produces 5. And their costs it's hard to get the exact costs. They're $70, $80, $100 a pound at one point. They don't care because it's part of their overall project. And you think about here, and you think about we have 1 million out of the 50 million pounds we consume is produced here. We have one conversion facility owned by Honeywell called Metropolis that was just Converdyne that was closed in October. It was shuttered, not permanently but temporarily. Enrichment, we don't on our soil we don't own. There's enrichment owned by Urenco in New Mexico, but we don't own it. And it's stunning to me how the U.S. has still such dependency on nuclear power and obviously weaponry, yet they don't control any part of the fuel cycle.
It's interesting, and we did once upon a time, at the dawn of the commercial nuclear industry, we did. We pretty much controlled everything. There are veterans who can come on your podcast and can explain to your listeners why we lost that. There are a lot of different reasons. Here's where my globalist hat comes in.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it doesn't matter. I will also say that the kind of capitalism that we practice in the U.S., why is anybody surprised? This is how we roll. This is U.S. Right. Capitalism. And so you can't, the train left the station. We can't undo that. I mean, Walmart is successful because it imports from China. There's nothing wrong with that. If and I understand why people want to shop at Walmart. If you have if you're trying to raise your 2 kids and on X amount of annual income, hell yeah, you're going to go shop at Walmart. I don't care. And if you want to spend more money on some artisanal good that might be made here in the U.S. locally, walk on. So I don't have that issue, and I go back to, hey, if it weren't for overseas suppliers, the nuclear industry in this country would have collapsed. But it is nevertheless interesting to watch the models of Russia and China. And France wanted to do it, but their EPR is, it's almost over-designed and it's clearly unbuildable. It's almost unconstructible, and they're going to have to fix that. But watching those models, I mean, they're brilliant. No, we don't do it that way because we don't. Does that mean that American companies, nuclear vendors or suppliers can't be involved in what goes on with Russian and Chinese marketing and construction activities overseas? No, actually it doesn't. And I don't see, I would like to see some U.S. vendors kind of wake up and say, hey, let's go team with these people. Let's figure out what we have to offer and let's get a piece of it. Because multinationals are how all companies survive. I mean, that's capitalism.
Absolutely.
So, I wish that some of the U.S. miners would have, why don't you just freaking go to Moscow and ask for a meeting and see what can happen? I would have done it. Yep. I would have. Wouldn't you?
Yep.
I mean, come on. And I bet you could have brought enough political pressure to bear to at least get them to go, okay, fine, we'll buy 100,000 pounds. Why not? To me, it's very obvious. Like, this is what you should have done. Or at least try.
So let's morph into the big topic of the day.
Do we have to? Yes, I know.
Yeah, I know. I was debating, do we want to go there? But Section 232. So I'll explain to the audience. Section 232 is something on the grounds of, it was written in 1962 or 63. It's into law that enables the president to enact the Section 232 on the grounds of national security for industries that could be at risk, and it could put the country at risk if from foreign competition, if there's security that's if the security of the country is at risk. So, 2 U.S. uranium miners back in January filed a petition with the U.S. government, with the Department of Commerce, saying we want you to investigate the foreign importation of uranium into the United States. At one point back in the 80s, the U.S. was producing 45 million pounds of uranium and using 50, and today it produces 1 million pounds, 1.1 to 1.5. So basically it's non-existent. And they said that if we're to survive, we need help because the U.S. is importing Kazakh, Russian, and Uzbeki uranium into this country. Some years it's 35%, other years it's 50%, but they're not our friends, essentially. And we would like for you to, Mr. President, to require the U.S. utilities to buy 25% of their uranium from us. And so that's what's at issue. And in July, the Department of Commerce had the right to choose to investigate or not, and they chose to investigate. And since then, they now have, once they did, they have 9 months to make a recommendation to President Trump, and then he has 60 days, I believe, to decide what to do. And that's where it's at. So at issue, folks, is really the U.S. Nuclear power plants don't want to be told where to buy their uranium from and what to pay because the price is down. And the U.S. miners are saying, well, it's down because the Kazakhs are selling so much damn uranium and their costs are lower. And I'm shortcutting all this just to not get into a big discussion. And so it kind of sits out there. Now, on one hand, the mining side would say that, well, the overall fuel cycle on a cost per megawatt hour is somewhere, the fuel cycle, the whole fuel cycle, which is mining, enrichment, conversion, enrichment, fabrication into pellets, into rods, is 18 to 22% of the overall cost, and the uranium is somewhere about 5 to 7%. And that's what the numbers would say. On the other hand, the fuel buyers are saying, hey, wait a second, our costs, we're getting pounded right now by especially in the competitive markets. So the Kazakhs and Russians, they've been great suppliers to us for decades. So who cares? We have security of supply because they've always supplied us. And that's kind of where they come at. And you could read their comments at the Department of Commerce. I'm sure, Andrea, you've done it. I've done it. I've spent a day just reading. There's 800 plus comments. You just want to, you're right. You want to jump out of
more
window.
More power to you. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
That's right.
So how do you think? Talk to your view on it.
It's a disaster. It's of all the options that the two petitioners could have come up with, this one is guaranteed to antagonize and polarize. It's really unfortunate. I don't know of many in the global uranium industry who support what they have done. It certainly could make the futures of all U.S. uranium miners better, but it could also go very badly. I'm against it. I think that the petition it's short-sighted. It shows that the petitioners may not clearly don't appreciate the challenges that their customers face. And again, you have to go and talk to your customers and find out what are your challenges, what are your issues, here's what's going on with me. Is there a way that we can solve this? Now, it is also true that through this period where everyone is overproducing, and the prices are dropping, that utilities were also simply not buying because they didn't need to, they didn't have to, and it isn't their job to bail out producers who are stupid. So it isn't right, and it isn't, who should be ashamed of themselves, Mike, right?
Yep.
So it isn't, it's more complicated and more complex than, hey, there's this flood of cheap material. With respect to the historical production numbers, earlier in this conversation, we talked that at the very beginning of the global commercial nuclear industry, the U.S. was the supplier. At the same time, the U.S. was in a Cold War. And so, of course, there was a shit ton of uranium produced in this country. One could argue that all the low-hanging fruit is gone, and it is. There are certainly deposits and resources in the U.S. Not the issue. The issue is how much does it cost to bring them out of the ground. That's what the issue is. ISR has been an incredible boon to uranium mining the world over. I think it will flourish in the U.S. when the market prices improve. Mm-hmm. But I just don't see how forcing your customers to buy from you, to set a quota, I just don't see how that engenders, future positive, productive business relationships. And as I said earlier, to me, what I take out of it is here are companies that simply do not understand their customers.
Yeah.
And that's
it's interesting.
And filing a petition, that's a slap in the face. It's like, not only do I not understand you, I don't care. And I don't care what damage this does to you. This is what I'm doing. That's unfortunate.
So the political winds play a role in all this stuff.
They do.
Right. So one of the things that, and you try and people handicap, it's a slam dunk or it's not a slam dunk. And I'm somewhere in between. I don't know, because one thing I've learned as an investor is over the many decades of doing this is whatever seems obvious from a political standpoint doesn't mean anything, because you have no idea. And you live in D.C., so you have no idea the horse trading that takes place in these back rooms. And earlier in my career, I remember a couple of times where I thought, it's a no-brainer, and you're just like, oh God, on anything. So I take it as a we shall see. I could see both sides of it. You and I spoke publicly about it, right? The uranium miners across the board, globally, not just the U.S. miners, they all have put themselves where they are now. And and over the last 7 years, and it really is interesting, and you know the industry so well, but the nature of the contracts in this market are such that they're long-term, most of them. And that security blanket, when Fukushima went down and 13% of world demand went offline in 2011, 2012, 13, they kept thinking, well, the Japanese have to come back online. And if they don't, that's okay, because at the last peak, we signed so many contracts at much higher prices. We're good. And they were producing and selling, even though the price of uranium was declining, they were selling into much higher price contracts.
Yeah, that's right.
And that gave them comfort. And without the foresight to look ahead and say, well, things are changing now. And they also, that megatons to megawatts program, and folks who are listening, the U.S. back in 93 signed an agreement with the Russians because they were worried about all these 22,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles winding its way out on the open market. When Russia, after the wall fell, they were hurting economically. they said, let's get them to downblend these nuclear bombs to high enriched to low enriched. And it was called the HEU to LEU program, which was then named megatons to megawatts. And the U.S. would buy as much as 20 million pounds a year of uranium. And that was a huge amount of supply. And then that ended in 2013. And the market and the miners thought, okay, well, that's a lot of uranium coming off, only to be replaced by the Obama administration, sending about 6 to 7 million pounds a year into the market that they bartered for the cleanup of a couple of old gaseous diffusion enrichment plants. So but again, the miners got caught. They were living off of old contracts. They weren't planning for a rainy day, and that rainy day came. And they were increasing production and capital spending while the market was going down.
Yes, wishful thinking.
Right. So
a lot of just very, yeah.
Yep. And
yeah.
you and I talked in Boston. So from my perspective in the world of natural resource investing, really, really bad ultimately is good because
yes.
Right, because they have to a point, they have no choice. They have to cut production and
right. Hallelujah! Like thank you,
right.
everyone, for doing that.
Exactly, which is kind of
which is why actually, and it's people like you, it's people like you that came out wrong. It's people from the financial community. Actually doing due diligence, and there's been a lot. My hostility to the financial community has always been, sort of coming in and looking at us like you guys are morons, which is true, but also not understanding there are very good reasons why things are the way they are, and that it isn't that we're unwilling to try new things or do things differently. It's like this is a weird world here, but it's now this time around, and we are in a new era, and I do believe we're in a recovery, and it is because of the entrance of financial entities seeing this fantastic opportunity, just like you, Mike, and going, you know what, we're buying. It's $20 a pound. We're buying, and that has happened, and while it hasn't necessarily, mopped up all this inventory that's out there, so much pressure has been put on the spot price. I mean, it has gone up. It's crazy. It's like, what, 29 now? Or I saw, a bid of, a 29. I thought I couldn't believe it. And that was just this week.
Yep.
So things have changed. That, the turnaround is here. I suspect that, and it's not, by the way, out there in Mike's listener land, it's steady, small, incremental growth. I do not, at least right now today, believe we're going to see like skyrocketing prices and long-term prices just jumping out. It's going to take a while. And I certainly hope that the recovery is steady, because that's more manageable, that's more mature. Hopefully we won't find ourselves right back in the situation we were even a year ago in like 5 years. Don't want that to happen. But because of this recovery, thank you, I sometimes wonder whether the petitioners and the petition will become anachronistic, like we're going to lapse them. The market is recovering, shit is happening, and they're going to be left behind with a very bitter, hollow taste. Because the market is recovered.
Yeah.
And it's recovering. And these guys, they filed a petition. I know they were desperate. I get it. I'm also a U.S. supplier, by the way, folks. How they have gone there, the supply side has suffered. Don't think that I include myself in that. But it's almost like, circumstances are going to overtake events, or is it events are going to overtake circumstances? And we're going to wake up, a year from now, and things are going to be very different. I don't know. So I wonder, and I do worry, whatever the outcome is of the petition, it could absolutely screw things up. I don't want anything to screw up the recovery.
Well,
I just don't know.
Well, it's interesting. It's kind of the way I've been processing it in my mind is I think, okay, there is, like you said, inventory is getting worked down, and underfeeding is reducing, and that's been the big 800-pound gorilla. And so you've got all of these healing signs taking place. And what, in my mind, what takes it to another level price-wise is when you start to see longer-term contracts or medium-term start to get signed. And from an investing standpoint, one of the things any market doesn't like is uncertainty. And if I'm a fuel buyer and I don't know where I'm going to have to contract my purchases from, if I have to go into the market, and it's caused kind of like a hiatus in purchasing because my guess is they just want to know where they have to go. Now, obviously, we know from the petitions they don't want to do it, but if they have to, at least it's like anything. Certainty gives you the ability to make a game plan. And they don't have that certainty right now.
No, they don't. And I think some of them, if I'm, I read other trade publications as well, absolutely, and because they're good. There's one school of thought is, hey, maybe utilities will kind of pick up on their contracting. Knowing or believing that any of the material they buy, whether it's from, the uranium axis of evil, Kazakhstan, Russia, Uzbekistan, or not, will be grandfathered. And I think that legally speaking, I believe that I think that's pretty solid. Nevertheless, there are some who are thinking, I'm not going to risk that. We have to keep our reactors operating. So when you say there was a hiatus, it's a big sort of people inhaling, big breaths, you're right. I have no feel for how things are going to play out. If it was me, I think I would go ahead and buy, but
just to get ahead of it, right?
Absolutely. Oh my God, absolutely. I'm signing contracts, but I'm also making sure I have smart lawyers saying, hey, if I have to declare force majeure, and I might, that is a risk you supplier have to take. And I would also maybe sign, contracts with, sign more contracts with Cameco or even other U.S. producers. They're hedges. Like, you have to be able to do this.
Well, it's interesting. You know how I'm thinking? I'm thinking, if I'm them, if I'm both sides, and I don't know, but I would try and reach out to each other and say, listen, is there a way we could come to a common ground here?
And that could very well be happening. If it is, I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard it. I do know, I have lawyers, and my lawyer has said lawsuits are for losers. So if there's a way to figure it out,
that's it.
And that's what you should do.
Exactly. How much? Because look, at the end of the day, that 25% is a big ask, right? And that's 12 million pounds, and the U.S. hasn't produced that in a long time. Down the road, but maybe that was a negotiating starting point. You don't know, right? So
no, we don't know.
But it's interesting. So so tell me, how do listeners who want to learn more about the nuclear power industry on a regular basis subscribe to Nuclear Fuel Week?
To Fuel Cycle Week? Well, that's all right. I know, but you know what? If I could change the name on my publication to that. I'm kidding. Well, I think with respect to just broad nuclear energy, there are any number of search engines, and nuclear, and this is free stuff, by the way. Nuclear Town Hall does a great job of aggregating, and so I would, you can sign up to that. There are any number of ways you can get information about what's going on in the wacky world of nuclear energy. With respect to Fuel Cycle Week, got a website, you can reach out. But here's what I have to say. Because, and so this is a caveat, and this is, possibly me maybe handicapping myself and my ability to generate revenue. But because so much of what I write about is so insidery.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's extremely valuable. People, you want to know why utilities do or don't think.
And when you say
anything.
insider, you don't mean insider information. You mean industry specific, right?
Oh yeah. Industry specific.
Yeah,
Like this is, you want to know, like this thing happened. Here's what people are saying about it. You know, here's some scoop. Here's some additional color commentary. Don't read it in any other publication. You know, this is definitely, you know, where I know that Fuel Cycle Week has an advantage over its competition, and that's why people subscribe. But because of that very nature, I like to vet who is subscribing. And certainly if you're in the nuclear industry, I have no problem.
Mm-hmm.
For others, you know, particularly individuals, it's so important that this information does not get out. We don't want the outsiders. We don't want other people to know our dirty laundry, and we certainly don't want any antis to know.
Good. There you go.
We really don't.
No.
I mean, we really, really don't. I don't want to be responsible for giving anybody, you know, ammunition to take us down. And a lot of what is discussed. Look, are the things that we do illegal? Of course not. But you know, the way I talk about them, you know, I use blunt language. I can be critical. I can praise. I use some swear words. I use slang. And it can be taken out of context the wrong way. So I encourage you. I would love for you to reach out, Andrea at fuelcycleweek.com. Please email me. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions that come up from this discussion, which I'm sure there will be a lot. And you and I have just been like babbling. I hope I come
it's
across
been great.
as, you know,
it
actually has been. I know it's bad. I mean, the two of us get together and it's like 5 hours later. Everybody,
exactly. It's
other people are like, would the two of you just shut up already? You and I are like, what? We haven't even what?
Started.
Yes. So please reach out to me, but knowing that I'm going to, you know, you're going to be interrogated. Who are you? What do you want? You know, what company? You know, how much money? You know, do you have skin in the game? Are you buying uranium? These are things I want to know. And actually, it isn't unlike if there was either a private individual or companies like yours, Mike, who may or may not have purchased material. Like you're getting vetted. You know, you just don't show up and buy uranium. You just don't show up and buy Fuel Cycle Week either, people. You know, it just has to be.
That's great.
So.
Well, listen,
hey, and it's a brand. I got a brand. I
love it.
Brand,
I love it.
Yeah.
Well,
I know you do.
This has been great, and I really appreciate your time.
And I love it. I appreciate your time. We need to do this routinely. We have this baseline now.
Yes.
And we should just get together and just, you know, whatever's happened, let's have a meeting of the month.
Absolutely. I really did. It's great, and I'm going to have you on again, and let's stay in touch.
Okay, that sounds great, Mike.
Great.
Thanks,
Andrea.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving to you, too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening with Andrea and I talk all things nuclear and uranium. Really nice lady, smart, knows the sector really, really well, obviously. It's what she does day in and day out, has some great insights. We agree on plenty of things. Some things we don't disagree on. I'm not, you know, if 232 does go through, I don't know which way it comes out. I'm more inclined to think that something happens positive for the U.S. miners than not. But like I said, when I was talking to her, you never know how these things come out. You can't, while it looks like a no-brainer for commerce to do something, you just don't know. And so you have to, you know, plan accordingly. I think it's, for me, I think it's way more likely than not. At the end of the day, the petitioners, if the two petitioners, if 232 in some way, shape, or form goes through, my view is the utilities are going to have to buy from them. They're besides Cameco, they're it in terms of immediate production. So, you know, but we might just have different views on that, and I didn't have time to get into a whole discussion on it. But she's a very smart lady, and hope you enjoyed the conversation. And we will catch you soon. I'll see you next week. Thanks.
The information presented on Talking Stocks Over a Beer is the opinion of its hosts and guests. You should not base your investment decisions solely on this broadcast. Remember, it's your money and your responsibility.